the biggest entrepreneur platform on the planet. This is Business Rockstars.
So, Dr. Steve Greer, thank you so much for joining us today. Go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, I'm a medical doctor, emergency trauma, whose family was involved in the aerospace industry. My uncle worked on the lunar module, the first man on the moon machine, that thing that landed. Everybody may recall in history in '69. Yes. And back when I was younger, I also had a sighting of what the public are calling UFOs or UAPs, and began a research project into this. And because of some of the connections I had, I was able to identify initially about 24 top secret military CIA sources on this issue. And by 2001, we did the National Press Club event of the Disclosure Project. So people can see that on our YouTube channel and also on our website at SeriousDisclosure.com. And during that course, back in '93, when President Clinton was the president, he and his CIA director, James Woolsey, wanted me to brief them on this subject because, to my astonishment, I thought this was not true. They had made inquiries into the subject and had been denied access, I'm quoting. So it was kind of unusual for an emergency doctor in his 30s to be asked to fly up to Washington to brief the sitting director of the CIA on something that every man on the street would think they would know. So that began my whole trip down the rabbit hole. And by 1998, we had concluded that the president and the Congress were not going to do anything constructive on the problem to disclose to the public what these UFOs were, why they were here, why it was kept secret, such a high level of classification. So we did it ourselves. We did the National Press Club event in 2001 in May 9th. And that started the whole global disclosure movement that's now led to now CNN and Washington Post and every major media covering what they're now calling, it's another fake made up name, UAPs. Now keep in mind that these objects that you see are neither UFOs nor UAPs. There are two things people are seeing. One are extraterrestrial vehicles, ETVs, that's what they're actually called at the National Security Agency. And the others are, most of them, are our classified field propulsion, so-called anti-gravity craft that we have had since the mid to late 50s. So we have 200,000 pages of documents from Lockheed Skunk Works, Northrop, proving that in fact these have been built and worked on through a black budget process. Now, meanwhile, you have the media and the Congress going, gee, what are these? Maybe we should study what they are. When in the back room in these black projects, which are called unacknowledged special access projects, they've already figured out what they are, how they operate, how they fly, but those two worlds never intersect. So my project is the bridge between that black world and the rest of the world. That's the Cliff Note version of what we're doing. And it's very, very complex. Now we have over 980 whistleblowers in the government and corporations who've given us information and documents. But it's become so controversial because what we've exposed is that the reason you and I are still using fossil fuels to run this computer we're on is because those technologies have been kept secret. So this is Business Rockstars. This is the biggest business and technology story of the last 150 years. And nobody in the business world knows that. So that's why I wanted to bring this up. It's a very, very important business and technology story. Everyone thinks it's about little green men or gray men. That's not what it's about. The secrecy has to do with maintaining the hegemony of the $800, $900 trillion utilities, fossil fuel, oil, gas, coal, internal combustion engine, jets, rockets. These technologies are all obsolete. and have been obsolete since before I was born in 1955. I'm no spring chicken. And I say this with absolute certainty and authority because I have all the proof and evidence of it. Now, getting it out to the public is another story, because you've got arrayed against you some of the most powerful corrupting interests in the world that want to stop it. And this is where you get into really heavy counterintelligence, false information, false flag operations, et cetera, and so on. So to that end, I basically have pivoted away from, I still do briefings for government officials as a non-governmental group, but we've really moved recently in the last few years into doing educational documentaries, which is an interesting business story because the #1 documentary ever done in history is now on Amazon Prime and Tubi. It's called Unacknowledged. And it deals with this subject, and it deals with what are called unacknowledged special access projects. And it's, it's about an hour and 40 minutes. Anyone can see it now for free. You can buy it also on iTunes and Amazon. And then the one that came out after that last year is one called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And this is a documentary that's also been #1 in the world. And Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind is when humans initiate contact with the few objects out there that are actually of extraterrestrial origin. And I lead up a group that now is doing this. We have over 1 million people around the world attempting to do this. And we've had a great deal of success, as you'll see in that documentary. An interesting little business tech side note, and I think this is anyone who's in the tech world and app world and internet world will love this story. We crowdfunded all these documentaries, top crowdfunded documentaries in history.
Wow.
And then we crowdfunded an app. And if you go to your app store, you'll see CE5 Contact. It is right now #7 in the world for educational apps. It has been in the top 10 for 20 months on a crowdfunded app that has a $10 $9.99 entry point because it's a training program for making contact with these objects. And #3, we've spent $0 on marketing, not one dime, and it's been in the top 10. This is actually a wired tech story.
Yeah.
I mean, any tech, most people don't know this, but it's because there's this groundswell of interest out there to end secrecy on this issue, bring the technologies out that would fix forever the environment and eliminate poverty. That's what these technologies would do, but also that the militarization of the relationship between these objects and their occupants, let's call them the extraterrestrial civilizations, and humans, has been so badly managed that we're calling for a sort of citizens diplomacy effort for citizens to make contact. And that's what Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind are, is when humans initiate that contact and then successfully make it happen. And people like Demi Lovato have been going out in the desert with us doing this. And I know William Shatner has got the app and is doing it, and all kinds of people, Steven Tyler and Danica Patrick and Aaron Ford, all kinds of people all over the world are doing this and are having amazing experiences with this CE5 Contact app. And again, this has all been viral, word of mouth, organic growth.
Right.
We are a public interest group. We have no staff. We have no, it's a very unusual business, let's call it. And yet we have millions of people around helping us all over the world. And it's very unusual to have both documentaries and an app hit #1 in the world with no marketing.
That's so true. And I want to dive more into that app, but I first want you to tell us about that awakening experience that you had as a child that kind of propelled you into this world and shaped who you are today.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting story for an emergency doctor to tell because I've taken care of so many death situations and trauma. I was 17 and I got very, very sick and died. And in the course of that, I had a classic near-death experience, NDE it's called. Mm-hmm. And I was raised a very atheist. We didn't believe in anything. No such thing as consciousness or the soul. But I had an experience of what you might call cosmic consciousness. It's a beautiful experience. Obviously, here I am. I survived that event. But I began to learn meditation. And back in those days, this happened in the spring of 1973, I learned meditation, a sort of Sanskrit mantra meditation after this experience. So I wanted to say, how do I get back to that state of infinite peace and consciousness? It was so beautiful. Mm-hmm. And so I did, and I started having these amazing experiences. And one night when I was in first year of college, I was up in the mountains of North Carolina meditating at sunset and discovered that in consciousness and thought, one could interface with the electronics. It's kind of what like Elon Musk is trying to do with Neuralink, right. The electronics on board these spacecraft. And I did it. And an ET craft came in, and I had this amazing experience. And that's when I discovered what a close encounter of the fifth kind was. It wasn't a Google search, and Google didn't exist in 73. It was a direct experience. So that unlocked this sort of state of wonderment, this young boy, while I was 17, 18. When I had the experience, I just turned 18. And up in the mountains. And I realized that these civilizations, not only are they not hostile, but they're at the level of almost a bodhisattva. They're so enlightened that even their technologies are interfacing with quanta of thought and consciousness, what's called field consciousness. And those are people who are familiar with Dr. John's work at Princeton, where he did experiments where he would put people in a room and they would think to a random number generator, which is a quantum machine that just spits out zeros and ones. Right. And they would find that if you intended it to put out more ones, they would put out more ones, like a 70% of the time, which should be technically impossible. Right. But the reality is what quantum physicists have described as the entangled universe, where everything is every point in space and time is connected to each other. That's how interstellar travel and communication happens. Wow. So as I mentioned, Neuralink, Elon Musk is doing sort of a primitive version of trying to figure out how you can think to your computer and have it do something.
Right.
Now he's doing it with wires. Eventually you have to go wireless, which means you have to understand the consciousness field and what the quanta of thought are in a directed, intended stream of thought. Well, this is basically the meditative state and the technique that we teach in the CE5 Contact app. That's the core operating system, if you want to look at it from a computer point of view, of what CE5 Contact app is doing and teaching how to do. It's actually a training manual as an app. But that's really the big breakthrough I had. And I was a very young guy, and it led me into a long-term exploration of this issue personally. And then many years later, when I was a young doctor, made a formal organization to look into this more deeply. Now, I will say when I started the CE5 Contact program in 1990, 31 years ago, I really didn't understand anything about national security, how classified projects ran. I had people who took me under their wings and mentored me. A number of them had been in these unacknowledged special access projects. And they kind of taught me how that system works. So that was a very steep learning curve in the 90s and early 2000s for me. Sure. And it's something I'm still learning. I mean, because I interface with that world too much. I won't say more than that, but enough that it's very frightening. But I think that, it's not what the public thinks. And it's not something you'll ever see on CNN or in the New York Times.
And what can you tell us about ETs? What can people learn from them?
Well, there are several dozen civilizations that are directly involved with the Earth right now. And what our best assessment is, and of course, astrophysicist Dr. Jacques Vallée has concluded this as well, that when we detonated the first atomic weapon in 1945 at the Trinity site in New Mexico, everyone knows what an electromagnetic pulse is, but there's a pulse that goes out that's faster than the speed of light from those weapons. That is what's called trans-dimensional, crosses other dimensions. And that disrupts the extraterrestrial worlds and their communication and transportation systems. Now, we didn't know that. I don't think Oppenheimer or Teller or any of those people knew that, or Einstein. But the result was we immediately had all these UFOs surveilling all of our nuclear weapon sites and all of our missile sites once we started going into space, because they are concerned. They're not hostile, but they're very concerned about our hostility, human destructive hostility. Because in order for a civilization to survive the technological breakthroughs that we've had in the last 100 years, it has to evolve socially, and I might add spiritually, maybe not religiously, but spiritually, and in a way where they have gone beyond the use of violence to resolve problems. Because it's one thing to throw spears at each other, or muskets, or machine guns, or conventional bombs. Mm-hmm. You get into these weapons that can destroy the whole planet, then you're an existential threat to yourself, but potentially, as we're beginning to go out into space, we're a threat to other worlds. So the ET presence is very much concerned with an out of control world that is playing with, very dangerous. It's like giving a kid a hand grenade with the pin pulled out of it, and he doesn't know it. So I think that the ETs are very concerned about that primarily. They're also very concerned about the degradation of the biosphere, because there's great evidence. There are cave paintings of these ET craft and beings from 5,000, 10,000 years ago that have been carbon dated. I don't think we've been alone ever on this planet. It's just been very quietly done. Mm-hmm. But it seems like they have some long-term interest in the planet and the evolution of this planet and intelligent life, to where eventually the goal would be we would become interstellar, humans would be. But we've gone off the track in the last few decades. And in the meanwhile, because the 0 point energy, as it's called, the energy that runs those craft, and Nikola Tesla stumbled across this in the early part of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. It means that we've been degrading the biosphere for about 100 years longer than we should. And they're watching how quickly the biosphere is collapsing, the oceans are dying, species are becoming extinct. So there's a very big, what I call mission to planet Earth, that these spacecraft and their occupants are surveilling and doing scientific studies on. We have file after file after file of evidence that that's what they're looking at through events that have occurred on Earth that we've been able to document. Landing events, contact events, very well documented by military and pilots. Yeah. So that's another part of it. And I think, like I said, the bigger issue is that they know that we're at the point of breakout where we could become a peaceful, high-tech civilization that could become interplanetary. We are there. But psychologically and socially, spiritually, we're not there, politically, because we're still bombing each other and fighting over ephemera, nonsense. Right. And so I think this is one of the big issue that they're watching. They're waiting to see if we will grow up to be what Michikaku and others call a level 1 civilization, where we become literally a peaceful, functional, environmentally stable civilization. Now, let me go back to that a minute. We could have had, quote unquote, free energy, what's called 0 point energy. It's called 0 point because it's the baseline energy field that all of space, time, and matter is fluxing in and out of. And it was proven by Dr. Casimir back in the 1950s, by the way. And this is not a controversial statement I'm making. That energy field is known and been proven in physics to exist. What isn't known is that that energy field and other aspects to it, associated with it, enable interstellar travel, but also enable you to have a car and a house and a manufacturing plant with no pollution and also 0 cost. Because once you have an electromagnetic device at high voltages that tap into that field, you have this huge, what Tesla called the infinite energy field, is flowing out of that 0 point field, running your house or your manufacturing plant or your power plant, if you still want to have one, without any pollution, 0, but without also any nuclear waste, like you have in a nuclear power plant. So it's a very, very great advancement in science. The problem is it's the ultimate disruptive technology.
Right.
Nothing ever done in Silicon Valley is real disruptive. It's innovations around the periphery.
Right.
The real disruptive technologies are all classified, top secret, above top secret, because it would terminate the foundation of our industrial civilization, which means the energy, nuclear, oil, gas, coal, jets, rockets, the engines in your car. And by the way, a Tesla car isn't a Tesla at all. A real Tesla car would not have to be plugged into a power grid. And guess where the energy that's charging your batteries for your Tesla is coming from? Gas, coal, oil, little bit from solar and wind. The problem is the energy density of solar and wind is so low and it's so expensive. It's too little too late, given the rate of decay of the biosphere. So the next big project we're doing for 2022 is a feature film on this whole lost century of exotic technologies, but also organizing a open source, like GitHub, an open source energy lab to develop these technologies and disclose them to the public without any intellectual property holdback. It's like a last ditch Hail Mary throw to save the biosphere. And that's what we'll be doing in 2022. That's
so interesting. So after you had this awakening experience as a child, just taking a step back,
sure.
How long, or I guess not a child, you were 18, how long until you started the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence? And what was that journey like? And what kind of challenges did you have starting that center?
Yeah, that was a huge lag. It was a 17-year lag from 73 to 1990. And the reason it was is that I didn't know what to make of it. It took me that many years to get my feet and experiment with it to understand how it was working. I eventually became a meditation teacher and studied post-quantum physics, what I called entanglement, so I could understand how is this actually working. So as a young man at 18, I knew what the empirical experience was, what the experience was. I didn't really understand how it worked, why it worked, what was the mechanism of action. I'm a scientist, and doctors want to know the mechanism of action of every drug or every procedure, and how it's actually working. So I didn't understand that. And it took a long time to experiment. I kept experimenting with it with some hilarious things that happened. Like one time I was up in Aix-la-France and doing meditation retreats. I was wanting to become a teacher of meditation, so I really understood consciousness and non-locality and entanglement in physics. But it was a Vedic Sanskrit course. So one morning I went in and I did this, what's in the CE5 Contact app, this meditation, and did what the CIA call remote viewing, where you view out in space, and saw a craft and invited it to come in. Well, at lunch, I was walking with some friends, and this is in the movie on Amazon and Tubi and whatnot, called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And it's a hilarious story because the woman who was with me on that training tells her end of it. But here, this massive tetrahedron materializes in a blue sky at 1 p.m.
Wow.
And it descends towards us. And I go, oh, well, it worked. I was very young. I was only 20 when this happened. I just turned 20. And my friend is hitting me going, what did you do? And I said, well, I invited them to come visit. Of course, she was totally freaked out. Right. And there was a group of French meditation teacher trainees near us who were like freaking out. And that's when I realized I really needed to prepare people for what could happen because these protocols, these techniques work. So that was a couple years later. And then a couple years after that, in 77, I did a similar event up near Blowing Rock, North Carolina. And I had a friend with me, and a craft came outside our window, ended up being tracked from the Charlotte, North Carolina airport, and police helicopters chasing it. Wow. And I did this thing where I kind of guided it into where I was. It was being chased by aircraft, but they lost them. The ET crafts, almost instantaneously fast. It's like teleporting. They can be here and then here instantly across space. And they appeared outside my window, and we wake up he's in his bedroom, I'm in mine, and there's this blue light coming in with this craft, maybe 20, 30 feet outside the window.
Wow.
And of course, I didn't warn him I was going to do this. So he kind of freaked out. And so these experiences taught me a lot, but, I was sort of getting my sea legs with this, figuring out, how do you do this? And under what conditions will it work? And what are the consequences and unintended consequences in this case, where people around you are going, WTF, what are you doing? But these are real cases documented very well by multiple witnesses and even by the radar and the FAA tower. We actually got someone to take from the FAA the original tower air traffic controllers in Charlotte talking about the Eastern Airlines jet seeing this, and the police helicopter they called Snoopy 2 trying to figure out what this thing was as it was coming out over towards where I was up northwest of Charlotte in the mountains.
Wow. And obviously, it's a controversial subject. There are going to be a lot of people who doubt you, and I'm sure who doubt you until they see it themselves. Right. What is it like kind of running a business? And I guess, do you have to convince people to kind of believe you when they might not believe in your business?
No, you don't, because what my intention has always been since I've got on the public stage is put out the facts, put out the evidence, put out the photos, the video, the top secret documents. The people who worked in these projects. Now on my YouTube channel, we have something like 70 top secret people's testimony, name, rank, and serial number. Wow. With proof of who they are. And I put it out there and say, don't believe me at all. You go investigate it. My job is to put the investigation and the evidence together. And I don't want to convince you of anything. You can believe in fairies. You can believe that the world is flat. You can believe we're the only island of intelligent life in the universe. I don't give a damn. Right. So my view of it is, I was having a very interesting conversation with Tony Robbins about this. My view of it is that you put out the facts and the evidence and the truth as you understand it. People will either take the time to look into it or not. Mm-hmm. And look, I have a member of my family who had been the city editor of the Boston Globe, who back when I first became public on this said, look, if you put a dead extraterrestrial body on my desk, we will not cover this because we are a blue chip paper and this belongs in the National Enquirer. Mm. Because the subject, by the way, the CIA, I have documents to prove this, the CIA engaged various media outlets to not only block the story, but to be sure it appeared in tabloids that would discredit it, such as the National Enquirer. So this is something that is counterintelligence 101. Most people don't realize that happens. But when you look at one of the documents I have is a top secret document from 1950, stating that this subject is the biggest secret in the history of the United States, exceeding the development of the hydrogen bomb. Mm-hmm. Now, remember, the hydrogen bomb was detonated until 1952, not the atomic bomb, but the thermonuclear hydrogen bomb, which is 100 times more destructive than an atomic bomb. And so, and this is an uncontested top secret document that we have. So people have to understand the extraordinary things that will be done to defame someone like myself or to deflect it to sort of false perspectives. The biggest false perspective out there that's being pushed right now by operatives from the intelligence community is that these objects are a threat to our national security. So if you've looked at all the articles, and Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Gillibrand of New York, all this in the last 2 weeks, they've been pivoting about this, setting up an office and they don't know that the objects that they are being shown are ours, human, man-made, that are violating our airspace. But those are in a black project. So it's very sad because what the danger of that, of keeping our leaders in the dark, which we're trying to fix this problem as we speak. I have a home in DC where we try to brief people like that, is that they're trying to be manipulated and convincing the public that there's a threat from outer space. And this is just nonsense. I mean, these civilizations, if they were a threat, given the fact that their technologies are 100,000 years or more advanced than ours, we would have had our clock cleaned in 1945 when we foolishly began detonating atomic and nuclear weapons. So I don't think people realize that the power of these clandestine operations to spin the subject. And by the way, I mean, how else, that's how we got into the Iraq War. Colin Powell admitted that he was sent up to the UN with false intelligence to get us into this $2 trillion war that killed 1 million people in the Middle East. So the intelligence community, when they want to do something, can very well manipulate officials and the media in a dangerous direction. The most dangerous thing going on right now that no one's talking about are our leaders being manipulated in the direction of a threat from outer space, which is false, completely false. Now, who would benefit from that? The same military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about. When he left office, he said, beware the military-industrial complex. He was a 5-star general. He wasn't anti-military. I'm not anti-military. I'm from a military family. Dad was Navy, World War II, hand-to-hand combat in the Pacific on the islands. But that is not to say that you want, corrupt interests to run amok over our democracy and over the truth. And this issue is very potent because you look at all the tabloid movies in Hollywood on this subject, Independence Day, Alien. They're all alien invasion. Apple TV has a new series, Invasion. This is the thing that everyone clicks to because the intelligence community knows that they want to be able to go away from Cold War conflicts and even terrorism to getting the world to focus on a threat from outer space. Because there's another $5 trillion in military spending, at least, and maybe more. So I think we have to look at this very skeptically. I tend to actually be a big skeptic. For example, we've been able to prove that most of the whole public is obsessed with things like alien abductions and mutilations. Well, we've been able to prove that those are all staged to make it look like aliens did that, when in fact it was intelligence and some of their contractors conducting those.
Wow.
So this thing is very complicated.
Yeah.
And so I'd say on 98% of everything out there on the subject, I'm a very, very big skeptic. But the part of it that's true is actually very beautiful, mind-blowing. It's a whole new, we have a colonel who I knew before he passed away, Colonel Corso, who had handled some of the ET materials from the crash that had happened earlier in New Mexico and so-called Roswell, but there were many others. And he was at White Sands, where the first atomic bomb went off, and an ET craft landed, and he had an encounter with an ET being. And, the ET was trying to convince him to stand down some of this insanity we were doing. And the Colonel Corso said, "What's in it for me?" And the ET said, "A new world, if you can take it."
Wow.
So, it's interesting. I end this last documentary with that story because that was 1956. And, here we are 65 years later, 2/3 of a century, still using fossil fuels, still using jet engines, still using technologies, and still having endless wars. So, our civilization is facing an existential crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the solution is business and technology. In terms of business rock stars, we need some real business rock stars to step up to the plate on the tech end of this. I'm a doctor. I mean, I don't pretend to be a businessman at all. I'm the worst, person in terms of politics and glad-handing, brown-nosing business stuff. I'm just not that person. My wife and I, she's a scientist and a medical therapist, and I'm a medical doctor. My Achilles heel is that I really am not at all. We've done very well, but I'm not at all. I would never claim to be an MBA or someone who, can actually do that. So we need help from the business community who are interested at least in the technology of this to solve the environmental problems and also the problem of poverty around the world. The good news is we have those technologies, and I have a computer disk with thousands of pages of confiscated patents on it. But you have to set up an energy research lab to test them, get them, sorted out. That's going to be tens of millions of dollars conservatively. As a medical doctor, we don't make that much after you pay your malpractice insurance and put 4 kids through college like I have.
Right.
But, I'm comfortable, but I'm not, a decamillionaire or billionaire. But there are people who would have the means to do this. And I think that one of the things people need to ask themselves, if any of what I'm saying is true, it holds great promise for the future, and also would be an amazing business play, even as an open source project. Because in the first phase, you'd open source it. I mean, you release it to the world, no bars, no holdbacks. But in the second phase, you would begin to productize it. So one device would be a little one that run your computer and cell phone, never need to be charged and plugged in. The next product could be something that would run your house off the grid, but 24 hours a day, not like solar and wind that comes and goes,
Right.
with no battery backup required. Another one would be an electric generator motor. So instead of a Tesla car with 900 pounds of lithium-ion batteries, you'd have one little battery, start up this generator, run your car, pulling energy out of the zero-point energy field, et cetera, and so on. Same thing for refrigeration, heat pumps, utilities. When I say that this is it'd be like you need 100 companies the size of Apple or Amazon or bigger to get these technologies developed, adapted, and dispersed. Because this is heavy industry now we're talking about, not an app.
Right.
In time, because we probably don't have 15 years left before we're facing a very dangerous future of biosphere collapse and what have you. So anyone who's thinking long-term and is also smart in business would say, this is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity, but there's a strategy for doing it. If you do it the normal venture capital way, patent the technology, keep it secret, what's going to happen is that the intelligence community is going to seize it. Okay, so there's a whole reason why I have this business plan. It's a huge, very controversial, upside down business plan to most money people. But once they hear what you're up against, then they'll say, well, this makes total sense. But most people, the people I know who have developed these technologies and have had them confiscated or worse, some of the people have been assassinated, is they did it wrong. They did it secretively. They did it quietly. They went the conventional tech route.
Right.
This has to be done with the whole world watching. And you want to have a lab that's streamed on the internet through blockchain, and the whole world's watching. And the instant you get an operational system, the whole world has it.
Right.
Why? Because if it's done any other way, believe me, if it was so easy to do, Nikola Tesla would have brought a real Tesla car in the 1920s. Okay. Right. Not a toy battery car. So I think that's what, no offense to Elon, love Elon, he's great, but it's just not the real thing. But we need to do the real thing now. We need to grow up and do the real thing. Well,
Dr. Greer, your insight is amazing, and we could sit and chat for hours.
Yes.
Where do you see your center in the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, I hope in the next 5 years, we have successfully put the evidence and proofs out to have these technologies released, because we need to do that in the next 5 years. At the same time, in the next 5 to 10 years, I want to see more and more people taking it upon themselves. And this is where the CE5 Contact app, which was crowdfunded, by the way, is so important, where people view themselves as the frontline citizen diplomats or ambassadors to these civilizations, because the governments have totally mucked that up. And it sounded like during the Cold War, there was something called Physicians for Social Responsibility, where we went over to the Soviet Union and vice versa to create sort of a rapprochement between America and the Soviets. We need to have humans who take that. So I want to see that as a growing process. Also, because they've done studies in mass consciousness. When enough people start to do something, there's this non-local entangled effect that consciousness has that positively affects other people. Einstein called it the spooky effect in physics, but there's sort of this cool, not so spooky effect in consciousness and higher consciousness and in meditative states. And I think that that's why we need more and more people to do that, because the establishment is moving headlong into trying to create a time of interplanetary conflict, because it would benefit them. So I think that's the other thing. I want to see that grow from 1 million people or so to maybe 100 million people in the next 5 to 10 years doing that, because I think that will shift human consciousness into a positive future.
It's a great note to end it on. Dr. Greer, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really fun speaking with you.